So friends, in response to Donald Trump's DOJ lawyers making absurd and unsupportable arguments in court, a federal court judge just erupted by saying, "You must think I'm an idiot." Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, Donald Trump's remarkable, record-setting even, losing streak in court continues. We're going to start with the new reporting, and then we're going to turn to a new court opinion that, as far as I'm concerned, is beyond inspirational. But let's start with the new reporting. This from NBC News. Headline: Judges stand firm as Trump ramps up attacks on judiciary. And that article begins, several federal judges expressed frustration this week with how President Donald Trump's administration is pushing forward his sweeping agenda as Trump and his allies got even more aggressive in their criticism of the judiciary. And the article then surveys about a half a dozen cases in which Donald Trump is losing, and judges are losing their patience with Trump's DOJ attorneys. Some of the cases discussed in the article include: Judge says DOJ is hitting a fly with a sledgehammer. Judge calls out Elon Musk's social media posts. Judge says she is very offended by DOJ's actions. Judge blocks EPA efforts to cancel climate grants. And then the story that I want to focus on today. Soaked in animus, judge halts transgender military ban. Another federal judge in D.C. issued a preliminary injunction barring the Defense Department from implementing Trump's executive order banning transgender people from enlisting or serving in the military. U.S. District Judge Anna Reyes found the ban is soaked in animus and violates the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution because it discriminates based on transgender status and sex. This quote from Judge Reyes, quote, its language is unabashedly demeaning. Its policy stigmatizes transgender persons as inherently unfit, and its conclusions bear no relation to fact, the judge wrote, adding that the government failed to produce evidence about how many transgender service members there are or how transgender status impacts their military readiness. Quote, transgender persons have served openly since 2021, but defendants, meaning Donald Trump and his DOJ attorneys that were arguing these positions in court, defendants have not analyzed their service. That is unfortunate. Plaintiffs, who are transgender military members, plaintiffs' service records alone are Exhibit A for the proposition that transgender persons can have the warrior ethos, physical and mental health, selflessness, honor, integrity, and discipline to ensure military excellence, Reyes wrote. At a hearing Friday, the government, the DOJ attorneys, argued, as it had previously, that the order is focused on people with the medical condition gender dysphoria. Judge Reyes pointed to a February 27 tweet by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declaring that transgender troops are disqualified from service without an exemption. And the judge said, quote, I am not going to abide by government officials saying one thing to the public, saying what they really mean to the public, and coming in here to the court and telling me something different, like I'm an idiot, Reyes told the DOJ attorney assigned to this case. I am not an idiot. Now, friends, today I want to do something a little different than I ordinarily do in these Justice Matters videos. As you may know, when I review new court rulings and court opinions, I try to read just a short passage or two to give you a flavor of what the judge said and how the judge ruled. But today, I feel compelled to read about 4 pages of a 79-page ruling, but don't worry, they're double-spaced and we'll get through it quickly. But I will humbly ask you to stick with me here for just a few minutes. And as you listen to Judge Reyes's words, let them inspire you. Let them inspire us. Inspire our best instincts, decency, empathy, inclusivity, respect for our fellow human beings. But as importantly, listen to the evidence of how military service by transgender soldiers and sailors, Air Force members, and Marines, how that service has enhanced military excellence, how their service has made America safer and stronger. Let's turn to Judge Reyes's opinion. In the case of Nicholas Talbot et al., plaintiffs versus United States et al., defendants. And friends, let me just add that the plaintiffs are transgender military members, and the defendants are essentially Donald Trump, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. And when you hear the judge say, the defendants argue or the defendants claim, the judge is referring to Donald Trump's DOJ lawyers who are in court arguing this case. Memorandum opinion. In Executive Order number 14183, Donald Trump focuses on prioritizing military excellence and readiness. The military's clear mission is to protect the American people and our homeland as the world's most lethal and effective fighting force. Service by transgender persons is inconsistent with this mission because they lack the requisite warrior ethos to achieve military excellence. On February 26, 2025, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth issued a policy to implement the executive order directives. It disqualifies transgender troops from service without an exemption. The President has the power, indeed the obligation, to ensure military readiness. At times, however, leaders have used concern for military readiness to deny marginalized persons the privilege of serving. And then the judge helpfully provides some examples of past discrimination. Fill in the blank is not fully capable and will hinder combat effectiveness. Fill in the blank will disrupt unit cohesion and so diminish military effectiveness. Allowing, fill in the blank, to serve will undermine training, make it impossible to recruit successfully, and disrupt military order. And friends, who did the military fill in those blanks with? First minorities, then women in combat, then gays filled in that blank. Today, however, our military is stronger and our nation is safer for the millions of such blanks and all other persons who serve. Currently before the court is plaintiffs. And friends, instead of the word plaintiffs, as I read through Judge Reyes's ruling, plaintiffs is kind of, vague, impersonal, even a little dehumanizing. I'm going to use a term to describe who the plaintiffs are. They are transgender military members. Currently before the court is the transgender military members' renewed application for preliminary injunction. Those military members who are transgender claim that the executive order and the Hegseth policy, together referred to as the military ban, treats them as today's fill-in-the-blank group. Seeking nothing more than to serve their country, they ask the court to enjoin or put a stop to the military ban. They claim that the Hegseth policy was rushed and reached a preordained result, contains no analysis, and has an exemption in name only. The ban, at bottom, invokes derogatory language to target a vulnerable group in violation of the Fifth Amendment. Not at all, says defendants, and instead of defendants, I'm going to use the term Donald Trump's DOJ lawyers. Not at all, says Trump's DOJ lawyers. They assert that the military ban is necessary because transgender persons undermine military readiness and disrupt unit cohesion, good order, and discipline. Being transgender is inconsistent with high standards for service member readiness, lethality, cohesion, honesty, humility, uniformity, and integrity. Gender ideology activists are unconcerned with the requirements of military service, like physical and mental health, selflessness, and unit cohesion. Transgender persons cannot maintain an honorable, truthful, and disciplined lifestyle. Their expression of sexual identity is not consistent with humility and selflessness, and, Donald Trump's DOJ lawyers add, they also cost too much. Transgender military members beg to differ, and differ they can. Together, they have provided over 130 years of military service. They have served in roles ranging from senior military science instructor to artillery platoon commander to intelligence analyst to satellite operator to operations research analyst to naval flight officer to weapons officer. They have deployed around the globe, from Afghanistan to Poland to Korea to Iraq to Kuwait to the USS Ronald Reagan and USS George W. Bush. One is presently deployed to an active combat zone. They have earned more than 80 commendations, including a Bronze Star, 2 Global War on Terrorism Service Medals, 2 Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medals, numerous Meritorious Service Medals, numerous Commendation Medals, Air and Space Outstanding Unit Awards, and the Military Outstanding Volunteer Service Medal, among many others. Donald Trump's DOJ lawyers rejoined that these service records are inapposite, and the court must ignore them and instead defer to the military's judgment. Yes, the court must defer, but not blindly. The president issued the executive order within 7 days of taking office, and Secretary Hegseth issued the policy 30 days later. There is no evidence that they consulted with uniformed military leaders before doing so. Neither document contains any analysis nor cites any data. They pronounce that transgender persons are not honorable, truthful, or disciplined, but Trump's DOJ attorneys concede that these assertions are pure conjecture. And here is some of what was said in the recent court hearing. The court, the judge, is saying that transgender people or people with gender dysphoria, that their inherent identity is inconsistent with a commitment to an honorable, truthful, and disciplined lifestyle. Is that demeaning to them? Trump's DOJ attorney. I don't have a characterization for that, Your Honor. The court. Okay. And if I asked you about all the other words in the military ban with respect to the characterization of transgender people or people with gender dysphoria, you would have the same answer? Trump's DOJ attorney. Yes, Your Honor. The judge. There's nothing supporting these assertions in the studies, right? Trump's DOJ attorney. that says those same things? No, Your Honor, not that I know of. The judge, no study says anything close to those things, correct? Trump's DOJ lawyer, not that I know of, Your Honor. An action memo claims the policy was informed through consideration of 3 studies and cost data. Who considered the information, however, is anyone's guess, and Donald Trump's DOJ attorneys do not know. Maybe no one, because one study is 8 years old, and the other 2 studies actually support the transgender military members' position. Transgender persons have served openly since 2021, but Donald Trump's DOJ lawyers, the defendants, have not analyzed their service. That is unfortunate. Transgender military members' service records alone are Exhibit A for the proposition that transgender persons can have the warrior ethos, physical and mental health, selflessness, honor, integrity, and discipline to ensure military excellence. And get this, friends, because here is where Donald Trump's own DOJ attorneys blow up Donald Trump's executive order and Pete Hegseth's military ban. Because after the judge says that plaintiffs' own service records are Exhibit A for how they can have the warrior ethos, physical and mental health, selflessness, honor, integrity, and discipline to ensure military excellence, Donald Trump's DOJ attorneys agree. They agree that transgender military members are mentally and physically fit to serve, have served honorably, and have satisfied the rigorous standards demanded of them. Transgender military members, they acknowledge, have made America safer. So why discharge them and other decorated soldiers? Crickets from Trump's DOJ attorneys on this key question. Transgender military members have also introduced declarations from military leaders responsible for integrating transgender persons into open military service. Each declarant, meaning each military leader who provided a sworn declaration, evidence for Judge Reyes to consider on this issue, each declarant attests that our military has not fallen into an existential crisis since transgender persons began serving openly in 2021, nor have our lethal and effective soldiers come unglued when asked to use preferred pronouns, which the Hegseth policy also bans. To the contrary, they, each military leader offering a sworn declaration, they each testify that recruiting, unit cohesion, and military readiness have improved since 2021. To obtain an injunction, transgender military members must establish a likelihood of success on the merits. They have done so. The court's factual findings, the vast majority conceded by Donald Trump's DOJ attorneys and all supported by the record, make it highly unlikely that the military ban will survive judicial review, whether it be rational basis or intermediate scrutiny. Those are 2 different levels of legal tests that might apply to this issue, and Judge Reyes said Trump loses regardless of which of those 2 standards applies. Transgender military members must also show irreparable harm, and that the balance of the equities and the public interest favor an injunction. On the former, the military members face a violation of their constitutional rights, which constitutes irreparable harm. Indeed, the cruel irony is that thousands of transgender service members have sacrificed, some risking their lives, to ensure for others the very equal protection rights the military ban seeks to deny them. On the latter, defendants have not shown. They will be burdened by continuing the status quo pending this litigation. And avoiding constitutional violations is always in the public interest. The court therefore grants the military members' renewed application for preliminary injunction. You know, friends, I don't usually get goosebumps when I read court rulings, judicial opinions, but I did when I read Judge Reyes's ruling. Because justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.